Welcome everybody. My name is Corey. I'm on the conference planning committee here for this year's No Regrets. Just a couple of housekeeping issues. First of all, silence your phones. And also, the closest restroom is actually down this hall and outside. You'll see some restrooms right at the end there, just outside. The other thing is...
Not outside the building.
No, right across the hallway. The other thing is emergency exits right there too. If there's something blocking that, you can head back this way. There are emergency exits on the end of the building as well. We are recording this session, so if you see some stuff in here that you want to go back and review, we should be able to make that available on the No Regrets website on our homepage. The other thing is that you can ask questions. Are you cool taking them throughout?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, that should keep it nice and lively. So, the last thing is there's a survey, and so we'd like your feedback. We use the survey results to factor into what we do for next year. So if you like the topic, you like the speaker, let us know about that. And it's part of the program itself. Otherwise, you can go online as well. We've got it on a Google survey tool. So, you know, when we were sitting down and planning for this year's No Regrets, we got a lot of feedback from last year about how things from, relationship-related issues, people were looking for a lot more help in that area. We got some feedback saying that, technology was a big thing nowadays. And so we figured that it was about time, especially if you've noticed this, if you guys have ever been on social media, like Facebook or whatever, you see there are people doing things out there that aren't so nice to other people. They're not loving each other. And so we felt it was time that we try to put together something that is reflective of what's God's attitude about how we use tools like social media. How can we use it for good, for loving, and as opposed to use it to tear down people, even those people that don't agree with our viewpoints. So I think we've got Jeremy Sexton. He's a pastor from Lakeside Community Church over in Algoma. He's actually been published. He's got a section in a book on communications. So he's got a lot to say about it. In fact, they did earlier, I think that was last year, right?
Yep.
They did an entire series on social media and tools of technology and communication. So it should be a really powerful topic. Sit back, ask lots of questions, keep it engaging. And if you have any questions or anything related to the event and you need to seek us out, we're wearing lanyards, black shirts, and we'll be happy to help you out. So enjoy. Thanks.
I'll ask you a logistics question.
Oh yeah.
All of us that are in this one, can we go to lunch C?
You can,
Nobody
yes.
can go to lunch A and B.
Yep, exactly. That's why we set it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
You can bring it right back here if you want to.
Well, let's jump in. Technology is awesome. All right, I love it. How many people in here are like, you would consider yourself like a big technology person? Like, you ready? Cool. Me, like, I'm a huge tech guy. I have plenty of geek threads, all right? Like, I'm a power user, currently using my Mac, my iPhone, and my iPad simultaneously as I'm speaking to do this right now. I make websites. I know a few different programming languages, a little PHP, a little JavaScript, HTML, all that good stuff. I basically eat, sleep, and breathe technology. So if you were worried that this session was going to be someone just telling you how bad it all is, like, you came to the wrong one, because I love it. And so now, not everybody's as savvy as I am, but a ton of people are connected. The Today Show had this stat recently, said that half of smartphone owners said they could not live without their cell phones. How many of you are with me in that half? Right?
I'm reaching that point.
Right? Like, I do everything with it. Everything. Now even I'm doing message prep for the weekends. My entire library is on my phone. I can pull up commentaries. If I'm listening to someone else preach, I'm like, I don't think that sounds right. But like, I'm doing the word study right there in the Greek, getting at it. And so without my phone, I feel completely naked. I don't know about you guys that would say can't live without it. I mean, I'd probably rather have my phone than have pants, like is what I'm saying. It's more important to me. And that's the thing, is that technology has done a ton of good. It's made us a lot more efficient. We're more efficient than ever. It helps us retain more information than we ever could before. Everything you could possibly want to know is just a couple taps away. There's this comedian, Pete Holmes, had this bit about this a couple years ago. Like, remember when you didn't know everything. And so maybe you're laying in bed and you wonder, where is Tom Petty from? And you couldn't Google it. There's no Google. This was before you could ask Jeeves even. You didn't want to wait for AOL to connect to find out, right? You had to ask people. You'd go to your friends and be like, hey, Bob, where's Tom Petty from? I don't know. And now he's impregnated with wonder, right? And so it sort of grows out from there until one day you're walking and you see a girl wearing a Heartbreakers t-shirt. And you run up to her and you go, where's Tom Petty from? And she says, Florida. And you're filled with joy, and that's how you met your wife. See, now we know everything. Everythyou you could want to know, it's a tap away, which is pretty great. How many people in here have ever used a phone to settle a debate? Right? All the time. You're at Buffalo Wings watching the game with someone. They're talking some mess, and you're like, nope, that's not true. Like, I'm telling you, Cam Newton's completion percentage way lower than Peyton Manning's. And you're just like, hey Siri, what's Cam Newton's completion percentage? She's like, Cam Newton's completion percentage is 59.8. You're like, that's what I thought. Told you. I do this all the time. Nobody gets away with any of that when I'm there, right? We're talking movies, sports, anything. It's like, boom, calling you out. Right? But here's the thing, is technology's done a lot of good, and it has changed our relationships fundamentally. Now, let's do a check here. How many of you are on Facebook? All right, it's pretty much everybody. How many of you are on Twitter? All right, not as many. How many of you are on Instagram? Oh, wow, not very many. I am on all three. I barely use Instagram because I guess there's only so many pictures of people's brunches that you can take in. But here's the thing. Has anybody in here, you would say the technology has impacted your relationships, good or bad, that has changed it in some way? Who's got an example of that they'd be willing to share? The way that technology sort of changed your relationship?
Through Facebook, I've been able to connect back with friends from high school, guys that I served with in the Navy, guys folks that I would never have talked to ever again, probably, without something like that.
Yeah, Brian?
Well, I have to second that.
When you invite people over to watch the Packers, but instead of talking to you there on the phone, it takes a little something away from them.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Yeah.
Being homeschooled, I didn't get much time to connect with my friends from middle school and elementary school. Being able to use Facebook to reconnect with them has made a significant impact on my life. I'm glad I've been able to reconnect with them. It also helps me connect with other heart families and other heart groups.
We connect with our foreign exchange students. Over the years, we've had quite a few students, and to try to call them or connect any other way is almost impossible. With Facebook, they're just there.
Similar to Al, reconnecting with high school friends, and I think going beyond just reconnecting is you really find out more about where their lives are right now, and you get a chance to really develop relationships to where when you're traveling or whatever, you make sure you get to visit them, or when they come up here, you visit with them. It really develops a prayer circle that I wouldn't have had before, and that's been really exciting for me.
I find it more challenging in terms of there's no more boundaries anymore with technology. Relationally, it's crept into most every relationship, so it's hard
to respond instantly to everything. Right?
I find at times people use technology instead of looking up at the person they're just sitting with. I received message from a coworker, literally sitting from here to this person away, an email that said they were upset with my Bible that was in our common file drawer. Turn around and tell me it's okay with me, but it's just sometimes it takes over the relationship rather than helps the relationship.
Yeah. You know, in some ways with it, like we're more connected than ever. Like talking about connecting with old friends, things like that. You can reach out to anybody around the world. My wife was out of town this week. She was in DC for work. So every night, like we could FaceTime. It was great. We could see each other. We could talk. Freaks the dog out. He has no idea what's going on. That's awesome. And so that's a really cool way to connect. Same thing, like my sister lives in Israel right now. She lives in Tel Aviv. And, you know, I grew up outside of Cleveland. It's where my family's still at. And for me, it's really no different her living all the way over there than her living in Cleveland. We have the same ease of communication with each other. We can text, we can talk, we can FaceTime, email, tweet, whatever. That's all there. It's taken the world and it's really shrunk it down. And so people that are far away, really, they don't seem all that far away anymore. At the same time, though, technology creates complications. You know, there's some friction that happens there. Talking about, you know, people aren't as connected when they're actually in person, in meet space, sitting in front of you. Like they're still somewhere else. And so there's this author, Sherry Turkle. She's got a couple books about this. One's called Alone Together. Sort of that idea that everybody shuts off into their own little world, just around other people on their phones, and then reclaiming conversation. That people want to have conversations, you know, they don't want to have them in person anymore. They want to have them over text or over email or whatever that might be. And you know, she talks about, I believe it's in Alone Together, where she talks about how even just having your phone on the table when you're sitting and having a conversation with someone is this subtle reminder to them that at any moment you're just a buzz or a ding away from going to some other place and they lose your attention. And so she talks about, recently I've seen her do a couple interviews and things, and there's two ideas that she really talks about for the way that technology's changed relationships. And the first is this idea of paradox of choice. And there's studies that have been done that show that if you give someone a ton of options about something versus someone that has only a very limited set of options, the person with the limited set of options is happier with the choice that they make than the person that has a myriad of options available to them. And it's interesting because now in dating, people have more options than ever. It used to be you got married at 19 and it was someone from your hometown, and those like 50 girls in your high school were the only ones that were ever an option, and you just picked one and married them, and that was that. You know. Now it's like people get married later. I got married at 27, I think, something like that. And so they get married later, so you're meeting more people, and then of course when you take it online, there's even more. How many people in here, you're going to be willing to admit with me, because I've done it too, that you've done online dating in some shape or form? Anybody? No? All right. I was on eHarmony once, did it. And yeah, it was worthless, but I did it, you know. And here's the thing is that with some of these online things, you have so many options available to you that what people do is they start going, well, maybe the next one is going to be the perfect one. Maybe the next option, this could be dating, this could be anything, this could be picking out a cake, like whatever it is. Like, well, maybe the next one's going to be perfect. And so you start micro-analyzing in a way that you don't. If you're like, okay, I got these 12 to pick from, all right, I'll pick this one. So this is, if you're a parent, this is a helpful thing with your kids. Like, what do you want to wear today? It's like, you want to wear the blue shoes or the red shoes? Pick a shoe. They're a lot happier and you're going to have a lot less trouble. But going with that way. And the other idea that she talks about is this thing that people self-edit a better version of themselves. When you have those conversations online, you're not responding in real time. You're not having to actually react in the moment. You can specifically craft everything that you say to try to meet what you think that person wants you to be. And so you're creating and crafting and piecing together this better version of yourself. And so what happens when you do that is that you don't actually end up then presenting you to this person. You're presenting this idealized version of yourself that you want to be. You hide behind a screen, you create this false persona. And so that's why, you know, I usually encourage people, if they are doing the online dating thing, I think it's great, but get that into real life as soon as possible, because otherwise you're never going to have that opportunity to really get to know a person. And so see, at the end of the day, technology is not good. Technology is not bad. Technology is a tool. And it all depends on how we use it. It's got pros, it's got cons. There's a lot of good we can do with it, but there's also a lot of traps that I think we can fall into along the way. And so there's two kinds of traps that I want to talk about this morning. The first is consumption traps. These are the kinds of traps that are passive, the ones that you can allow yourself to fall into by the way that you process and passively take in what you see online. Then there's contribution traps. These are the ones that are more active. These are the traps that you can fall into by the way that you act, the way that you engage, the way that you behave online. And so we'll start with the comparison, or the consumption traps here. And the first one is the comparison game, I like to call it. Now, there's a correlation between social media and depression that researchers have found. Why do you guys think that might be?
Is people look at all of these self-edited and curated versions of everyone else's life. They see the vacation photos and the boyfriends, and they see all that, and they are comparing their real life to these highly edited versions of everyone else's public life.
Nailed it. It's hacking my notes up here. Because I would have thought, you tell me, hey, there's a correlation between depression and social media. I would have thought it's because you go online and you're like, the people from my high school are dumb, y'all. Like, you know, you start reading things and you just like weed for humanity. Does anyone else have that experience? Is that just me? But it's not that. It's not that people overshare. It's not that they treat that little "what are you doing" box like a counselor's chair or something. Like, it's the good stuff people post because they're seeing all of these things, all this self-curated stuff that people are posting, and it depresses them. So we see somebody else's amazing weight loss, and then we're like, oh man, my gut's just getting a little bit bigger, right? Or we see somebody hanging out with a bunch of friends, and we start to feel a little bit lonelier. We see this amazing meal that someone's put together, and we feel bad about the chicken we just destroyed on the grill earlier that night. Right? And so we hold everybody else up as a measuring stick. Well, what does the Bible have to say about this? Paul writes this in Galatians. He says, "For if anyone thinks he is something, when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one test his own work, and then his reason to boast will be in himself and not in his neighbor." See, what Paul's saying here is that you can't be responsible for anybody but you. And so we only have our own selves to offer God. We only have our own work to offer him to show for us. And so it's not really relevant what anybody else is doing. And so how do we compare ourselves to other people? Well, we do it in two ways. We do it unfavorably. We see them, everything looks great, sunshine and lollipops, and our life is like, it's not that great. And so we think, man, they're killing it, we're not, we're barely hanging on. We feel like we're behind. I can just tell like a real true story out of this. There's a famous national pastor came into prominence a few years ago, and he's not that much older than I am, just like a couple of years. And I remember seeing that and was like, man, like, what am I doing with my life? Like, this dude's already pastor of this church, it's growing up, it's this mega church, and at the time I'm doing video design, graphic design for a church. And I mean, it's not like I was doing nothing, it's not like I was just, you know, living in my parents' basement, you know, unemployed or something like that. Like, I was doing great stuff. I'm working at this awesome church. My boss is a best-selling author. Like, I'm doing amazing things. Like, this was great. But there was a part of me that I was allowing myself to fall into this trap. I was comparing myself to this guy. I'm like, man, he's got that and I don't. And see, what Paul's saying here is that we're only going to be responsible for the work that we've done, because we can only do the things that God's equipped us to do. We can only do the things that he's given us the opportunities to do, that he's positioned us uniquely for. And so we compare ourselves to other people unfavorably. Then we also compare ourselves to other people favorably, right? This is why a lot of people watch reality TV shows, right? Like Honey Boo Boo Child or whatever that was a couple years ago was like all the rage. No one was watching that for any reason other than like, I am a pretty good parent after all. Like, my kid is not remotely as screwed up as this one is. Like, we're doing all right here. Like, that's the gratification you get from watching that. But see, that's just as much of a problem. Because when we do that, still we're making our standard some other person. And look, even if you're doing better than your neighbor, you're still falling well short of Jesus. So there's room for you to grow. You're not done yet. At one point, Jesus says, to whom much is given, much will be required. And Uncle Ben told young Peter Parker, with great power comes great responsibility. Right? You can look like you're doing a lot better than the people around you, but look, maybe you've got advantages that they don't. Maybe you're called to something bigger than they are. God may demand more from you than he does from them. And so if we fall short of what he's called us to be, even if that's still miles better than the people around us, we still have failed. So there's another passage from the New Testament that I think really nails it here. It's in Hebrews. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who with the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising its shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. We're called to run the race that is set in front of us. When we compare ourselves to other people, what we're doing is we're trying to run someone else's race. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever done any serious running or just, whatever. But what happens if you're running and you start looking over to the side while you're running? What happens? You start going that direction, right? You start veering off course. You start getting out of there. And so our spiritual races are the exact same way. We start looking in other directions. We start veering off course. Here's the deal. You can't run your race when you're looking in someone else's lane. And so how do we avoid this trap? Well, for one, as Judd Wilhite once said, social media is a billboard, not a diary. And by that, I don't mean like don't overshare, although we don't, it's just annoying. People don't care. But what it does mean is that we're only seeing the best of the best from people online. It's that self-editing the whole thing. We see other people online, they look a whole lot happier than we are. But look, this isn't a new phenomenon. This is a quote from a French philosopher named Montesquieu. He said this in the 18th century. He said, if we only wanted to be happy, it would be easy. But we want to be happier than other people, and that is almost always difficult since we think them happier than they are. There's nothing new under the sun, right? This is the new way that this sort of gets expressed. We've got to remember that we're not getting realistic pictures of people's lives. Like, their kids look so much better behaved than mine are. Well, yeah, because they deleted the 3 pictures before this one where Junior had his finger up his nose to the 3rd knuckle, you know what I mean? Like, those didn't get posted. I mean, look at the meal this guy's wife made. Well, sure, but you should have seen how bad she burnt the casserole the night before, right? And so, football season is coming to a close, Super Bowl tomorrow night. And so it's a great time for highlight packages. Everybody's showing how these great, especially that Panthers offense, man. Tell you what, that's where my allegiance is this Super Bowl. I'm just saying. I'm a Browns fan, so I never get to actually root in the Super Bowl. Vicariously, big team. But so what you see is the highlight packages, the diving catches, big runs for long yards, big tackles. See, that's what people are posting when they post online. Is they're giving you the best of their lives. But see, our everyday lives aren't even the rest of the plays in the game. Our everyday lives are practice, right? They're practice footage. And now I know Packers fans are diehard, but even y'all gotta admit, like, practice, I'm bored. No one wants to sit around and watch football practice. Like, it's not fun at all. Unless they're the Jets and they're punching each other in the face or whatever, it's just not entertaining. And so here's the thing. Don't compare your practice footage to someone else's highlight reel. Because it's always going to look worse. And so if you want to avoid this trap, I think this is how we do it. There's another way to beat this trap here. It happens in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10. We are created in Christ Jesus to do good works which God prepared beforehand that we should walk. So when we're in Christ, we are the workmanship of God. You are His art project, right? And so He's crafted and is still crafting and refining you to be what He's created you to be. And so we've got to remember that God, He's not shaping someone else. He's shaping the better version of you He created. Look, I'm a really bad Crawford, right? I'm a horrible handler. I'm a Sexton, right? And so we got to be secure in who we are in Christ. Not continue to wish somebody else.
One comment, when you were talking about looking at the person in the other lane, there's an old movie called American Flyers, and it was about Hell of the West, a bike race out in Colorado Springs. And this family always came in second, and they were like, yeah, that's good, and they said no. And they watched footage, actual footage, and every time when they were getting to just to the end of the race, the one brother would turn and look at the person that was coming up behind him. And every single time he said, that right there is when you lost the race. As soon as he took his eyes off where he was going, and he looked at the competition, he said, that's when you did it, right there.
One question though, like, you know, so one thing we struggle in our mentor ministry is finding people who not only want to serve as mentors, but also finding people to match up, you know? Yeah. And because I know there's like this pent up demand for mentorship. People want a guy they can share experiences with and say, how did you handle this? You know, and we're able to do it in large groups and in small groups to some extent, but literally pairing them up and having them get together for coffee on a Saturday morning, or, you know, go out for, you know, at night for coffee or whatever. So that's the challenge, and it seems like, well, how do you find that person that can help you step up your game?
Yeah. That's a good question. If I'm just totally honest, I'm really bad at that too. And so, anybody else in here have like any insight into that? Like Gordy? Good.
I'm involved in the mentoring program at our church. I'm a mentor to 2 individuals.
Okay.
When we first started, and I got trained as a mentor, one of the things was the person doing the training said, I expect you guys to go out and find someone. And I was all, yeah, I want to be there for somebody.
Yep.
And I asked the person right away, I said, I'm sorry, but I know we're supposed to ask some guy. I said, but as a guy, if somebody walks up to me and says, hey, how'd you like a mentor? I'm like, I'm not quite sure how that's going to be. You know, so let me take it a step further. I had no idea that God had a couple of guys already lined up for me, but I literally specifically said, okay, Lord, I got this mentor program thing, I'm all trained in it, and I know there's got to be somebody there you want to. And when I finally, you know, he gave me somebody to ask the first time around, and it was just, it's a God thing, because he literally, when I asked him about it, said, you have no idea. He said, I've been praying, and somebody would mentor me.
Yeah.
And God's got him there.
That's amazing.
And the same way with the second guy. It's just, I don't know how he does it, I'll just tell you that right there, but he's got him matched up. He does.
Yeah.
And all we gotta do is get in his will and just ask him to listen. So whoever you got mentoring, tell them this, they got somebody, God's got somebody for them to do it. That's my take on it. Anyway, go ahead, somebody else.
I'd say the one big thing, I used to be a youth pastor for a small non-denominational church, and we had a mentoring program. And the biggest thing going in is being realistic about your priorities and putting that, it can't be something else that you do. It can't be, well, squeeze it in here. Or, it can't be when I'm not at men's club and when I don't have the poker game that night and when I'm not throwing darts or when my wife doesn't have something else for me to do. It's got to be a legitimate priority. And that's why it's a huge thing to take on. It's an awesome thing to take on. Like he's saying, this is God-changing, life-changing awesomeness. But be realistic about the priority that it's putting on your life.
Thank you.
Cool. I mean, I almost wonder sometimes too with those sorts of relationships, if it's kind of, there's guys already sort of in your life that you kind of know, all right, well, if it's on your heart to be a mentor and you're already a step or two down the road, from this guy, just sort of have that like dude DTR conversation, like, like, man, I would love for this to, not just be a friendship, but really kind of take this to some sort of mentored relationship, kind of like Gordy's saying, having those conversations, just straight up asking, like, is this, what would you think about that? I think that's a way to sort of find those folks and sort of get that going.
And sorry to take it down a rabbit hole there, but the other thing, like I found myself in a mentoring relationship with a guy that was in my small group, and I think one other thing that helped me at the beginning of it is just simply saying, I don't have it all together. So if you're looking to me for all the answers, I can help you step through what I've experienced and what didn't work necessarily, but I can't tell you exactly how to live life.
Yeah.
You got to do something that works for you. So.
Yeah, I did some life training or life coaching training a little while ago, and I think it's really helpful in those kinds of relationships because in the framework that sort of looks through is it's not I have all the answers and you ask me questions and I give you answers. I'm the sounding board to help you figure out the answer. Because often it's like you're in a situation that I've not been in. I can't speak exactly to that, and so it's sort of asking more questions, honestly, than giving answers. I think stuff like that, if you're getting like a mentoring thing going, it's a helpful tool to kind of have in the back pocket of like, sometimes you just need to sit a dude down and be like, look man, you're a mess. Like, you gotta actually like speak up on things. But a lot of times it's like, man, well, what do I do about this? Like, all right, well, let's talk about it. What do you think you should do? Well, what does the scripture say about that? How are you just sort of helping them process like that? I think that's a powerful thing.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Let's talk about the other consumption trap here. And it's similar, but it's this idea of these grass is greener kind of relationships. Now, to be honest, who here is still Facebook friends with an ex-girlfriend? Couple? All right. Now, it's true about a lot of things, but I want to specifically hone in on relationships here. As in maybe we see a woman on Facebook and we start thinking, well, man, maybe I would be happier with them than I would be with my wife. Maybe it's an ex and you start thinking like, well, man, what if I stayed with her? You start playing that what if game. And man, maybe things would have worked out a little bit better. Maybe it would have been, maybe I'd be happier. Maybe you're looking back with rose lenses, right? And you're thinking about only the good things that person did. Meanwhile, your wife is reminding you of all her flaws because that's just what marriage does. And you start feeling like, well, man, maybe if I go back there, then I'm going to be happier and things are going to be better. For me, that's not really the way that I get tempted with this at all, because there's a reason I got off that bus usually. For me, there's other cases where it's like you start thinking about other people that, well, I never really gave that a shot. What would have happened if, man, what if I would have asked her out instead of asking my wife out? What would have happened then? What if I'd given so-and-so a try? And ultimately, this is the same problem at the root, is that we're looking for fulfillment in a place that we will never find it. You're resting your happiness in something that can't deliver it. I want to take a look at something that Jesus says in Luke 14. It says, now great crowds accompanied him, and he turned and said to them, If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Now, first of all, I love this because it notes that, all right, now great crowds are following Jesus. Look, I'm not a church growth expert at all, but I do know that this is probably not in the playbook. Like, all right, you got some people coming, now tell them all to hate their mom. Like, it's like, Jesus, what are you doing? Like, this is the wrong way to keep a crowd. You gotta, make it sticky or get like a next steps program going or something. And so now when Jesus says hate here, it doesn't necessarily mean what we might think of when we think hate. There's this turn of phrase in Jesus' day that you would use the phrase love this, hate that as a way to talk about preference. And so, love chocolate, hate vanilla. I'll still eat vanilla, but I prefer chocolate. It's sort of the way that phrasing would get used. And so you see this in the Bible when God says, Jacob I loved and Esau I hated. It doesn't mean he hated Esau. It's that he chose Jacob over Esau. And so what Jesus is saying then here is, look, if you want to be my disciple, this is a requirement. You have to prefer him to every other person, including yourself. And so that means, what this means is that there's no other relationship that can bear the weight of your identity or your happiness. It means that no other relationship can be the place you find your joy. No other relationship can be number one for you. And so, no matter who it is, no matter what the situation is, Jesus gets picked first. Anything else, anything we try to put in that spot, we got a word for that. It's idolatry. And that's really the core problem here. Idolatry is when we try to make any person or anything the place of our fulfillment, the place of our identity, the place of our happiness. So my wife and I watched this show on TV called Ink Master. Anybody seen it? Just one? Wow. It's not Spike TV, it's this tattoo reality show competition, which is crazy because, I mean, these people are getting tattooed for real. Like, you're a human canvas and Ink Master, you're walking out of there with some ink. And reality competitions usually lead to a lot of pressure, it's a lot of stress, guys screw up. I mean, it's one thing on Top Chef, you end up eating a dish that maybe turned out kind of poor. These people are walking away with jacked up tattoos for the rest of their life because they decided to be a human canvas for Ink Master. And so they did this show called Ink Master Redemption, where they would bring some of these old canvases back who had gotten just these gnarly tattoos that were terrible. And so they'd sit down with the host, and he kind of just talks to them about their experience, and they're like, I'm so mad at this guy, whatever. And so then the host tells them, well, we've got an artist in the other room that is willing to give you a new tattoo. It could be a cover-up of that one or something totally new if you want something new. Would you be interested in that? And everyone's like, yeah. And if you've ever seen TV before, you know the twist that's coming here. They walk into that other room, and there's the dude that jacked up their tattoo in the first place. And they're like, it's you! They kind of have this like heated moment. And so the idea is this redemption, that these guys want to come up with a new design, do a tattoo that actually looks good on this person and send them away happy. And if they've done that, they've got their redemption. So we're watching this, and it was amazing how like artist after artist is going, man, I do this for my daughter. Everything is for her. I just want her. I'm here on the show. I want her to see that this is all for her. I want her to know that I'm the artist that I actually can be and not this guy that messed up his tattoo. There's like person after person was saying like the exact same thing. And it was always the daughter too. Like no one cares what their sons think at all. But they all want their daughters to think that they know how to tattoo people. And so what happens is one of the artists who says this, he fails. The person looks at the drawing he does and goes, yeah, no, you're not coming near me again with a tattoo machine. Like, that's not happening. They're a sensible person, at least in that respect. And so he was devastated. He was crushed. And the reason why is because throughout the show, he had been revealing his idols. Is that he put his daughter at the center of everything. Look, love your kids. I'm not saying don't love your kids. Love your kids. Take care of them. But they can't be number one for you. And that's what this guy had done. And so when he fails, when he doesn't get his redemption for this, it wasn't just that he lost the competition. It wasn't just that he was disappointed. This shook his identity because that's where he hung it. And so if we want to avoid this trap, we've got to be willing to face a particularly tough truth. Crawford touched on it earlier this morning, is that if we're not happy, it's probably our fault. That we can blame all sorts of external circumstances, we can blame everybody around us, but at the end of the day, if we're not happy, it's likely on us. Like Crawford said earlier today, joy is a product of choice. And so if I'm not happy in my marriage, then more likely than not, that's on me. And so does anybody in here like take care of their lawn really well? Like, all right, so what do you do like for your lawn that helps it be so awesome?
It's the Scott's 4-step program.
What are
Occasionally 5.
Okay, what are the 5 steps of this program?
Well, there's a fall feeding, right, which will carry. Then there's a winter prep feeding, a spring crabgrass halts, right, stops the bed grass from coming up, feeds spring. Then there's a summertime feed to prevent burnout. Then there's aeration that you should be doing in the fall as well, and some irrigation.
All right. Yeah, I don't do any of that. And that's why my lawn looks terrible, right? Because here's the thing. I don't know how to take care of grass. And so my yard doesn't look that great. We do have, I don't know who, we do have a company come do the weeding thing so that it's not just crabgrass city. So we got that at least going on. Well, it doesn't look too bad. But I know I just learned things like, you're only supposed to cut your grass 1/3 of the blade. I had no idea that was a thing. Apparently that's how you're supposed to cut your grass, or you just wreck it. News to me.
Do you need a mentor? See, that was divine, man.
Yeah. Now, this isn't a complete non sequitur here. I asked this for a reason, because people often use the phrase, oh, the grass is greener on the other side, but here's the reality. Your grass would be green too if you watered it. Your grass would be green too if you went through the Scott's 5-step process of feeding and nurturing and weeding and caring for. Like, there's a whole lot. You could just unpack the Scott's lawn care steps and how this relates to our spirituality. You got to feed it, right? You got to focus on what you're doing right, not on what you're doing wrong. But you got to weed it. You got to get rid of sin. You got to take that stuff out of there as fast as possible. You need water. You got to get in the Word, get that living water, water that grass. I could just keep going all day with this. And see, this is the thing, is your grass would be green too if you watered it, man. And so we look at other people online, we're like, man, well, if I was with them, maybe I'd be happier. Like, no, you wouldn't, because the common denominator is you are miserable. And if you invest in the relationship you're in, if you're present in that, if you're seeking the Lord, if you're getting into the Word, if you're doing all those things, then that choice, those choices, the product of that is going to be joy. And so I'm going to move on now to our next subject before I do any questions here. Cool. Then we'll move on to from consumption to contribution traps. First one, I'm going to call this the Chatty Cathy syndrome. All right? We think of gossip as like this little white sin. Like, oh, it's not that big a deal. It's just gossip. Culturally, that's not even a word that carries negative connotation anymore. It's like gossip, you got gossip columnists and gossip magazines and gossip websites and things like that. It's not even a thing that registers to us as being wrong. But check out how Paul writes about this. Yes. Romans 1. It says, and since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They are filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them but give approval to those who practice them. Gossip makes that list, that those who do such things deserve to die. Envy, murder, malice, haters of God, and gossip. Like, that gets lumped in with some really heavy stuff. And so I suppose before we start talking about what to do with it, we should probably define it. So what do you guys think? How would you define gossip?
Talking about somebody else that you wouldn't say it in their face.
Okay. That's good. Anybody else?
Opinions are not backed up by truth.
Okay. Things that aren't true.
Fourth-hand information.
Yeah.
I didn't hear what was said earlier, but to me, gossip is saying anything that's not meant to build somebody up.
Yep.
It's going to help tear them down or whatever. I think that's really gossip.
That's good. Good. Anybody else? Touched on a lot of the pieces here. John Piper was asked this question once, and he gives a definition that I think is going to do us pretty well. This is what he says. Gossip is derogatory information that is shared about someone else, that is shared with others in a tone of confidentiality, that is not motivated by doing good to them, and that you are enjoying in a way that shows your heart is not humble. So I think this will do us well. It's derogatory, so it's negative. True, false, doesn't matter. If it's negative, it's gossip. It's about someone else. It's not your story to tell. It's not necessarily any of your business, but you're sharing it anyway. It's done in secrecy. Don't tell anybody, but it's not motivated by doing good to someone. You're not brainstorming solutions to their problem. Like, it's a beautiful thing when the people of God get together. They see someone in their circle that's hurting, that's veered off course, whatever, and they get together and they restore that person. It's a beautiful thing. Gossip doesn't do that. There's no redemptive, restorative process going on there. It's just, hey, let's talk about this and have fun with it. And the last part is that you're enjoying it without humility. I can't believe they would do that.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're doing when you do that is you're missing the plank in your eye for the speck in theirs. And so what's the big deal with it? Like, why is this such a negative thing? Why do people that do this deserve death, like Paul writes? Well, number one, gossip harms people. In Proverbs 26, it says, "For lack of wood, the fire goes out, and where there is no whisper, quarreling ceases. Is charcoal to hot embers and wood to fire, so is a quarrelsome man for kindling strife." The words of a whisperer are like delicious morsels. They go down into the inner parts of the body. So first thing is, gossip starts fires. It adds wood to the fire. You got no wood, you got no fire. But your fire starts dying down, you put some more wood on it, you'll build it back up. Well, that's exactly what gossip does. It keeps adding charcoal to the flames. It keeps adding fuel to the fire. It stirs up trouble. It creates conflict. These are both things that we're not called to do as followers of Jesus. We're not called to stir up trouble. We're not called to cause conflict. We're called to be peacemakers, not troublemakers, right? And so what's interesting here is that it puts us on the hook, not just for spreading gossip, but for listening to it as well. The words of a whisperer are like delicious morsels. I just picture like a little kid with chocolates, right? It's like, this is so good. So we're guilty when we participate, even passively. So if anyone in my church comes to me with like, people have been saying, unless they like name that person, and it's almost always themselves, that's some people, I'm not even, like, we're done here, conversation's over, because I'm not gonna listen to your gossip. Like, we're not gonna do this, all right? And so, there's another verse in Proverbs here that talks about it in Proverbs 20:19. It says, "Whoever goes about slandering reveals secrets, therefore do not associate with a simple babbler." Now, there's good advice here. There's a principle from this proverb that you can bank on. If someone gossips to you, they will gossip about you.
Mm-hmm.
That is, you can just take that to the bank. Mm-hmm. And so the bottom line here is that gossip is hurtful, it's harmful. It hurts people, it hurts communities. Ray Ortlund has this book about Proverbs. called Proverbs, Wisdom That Works. And this is what he says about this proverb. He says, I have never seen adultery send a whole church into meltdown. Gossip, by contrast, is often perceived as a little sin, but it destroys churches.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're spreading things that we should not be spreading online, in person, wherever, it's harmful. It hurts people and fractures our church communities. Second thing is, look, gossip is unproductive. It wastes time. We're called to a mission. And if we're wasting time, we're not fulfilling that mission. There's a strange warning Paul gives to Timothy at one point. He tells him to make sure that all of the young widows get married. Why does he tell them to do this? Well, he gives them two reasons. The first is that, look, if they decide too early that they're just going to stay widows, it's going to be more likely that they're going to be, they're going to find themselves committing sexual sin. Because if they're real young, they're probably not ready for this widow thing yet. The second reason is this, is besides that, they learn to be idlers, going about from house to house, and not only idlers, but gossips and busybodies, saying what they should not. So gossip gets paired with being a busybody here, with being a slacker. And so he's warning against these times, like, make sure that people have something to do, so that they don't get these people with nothing better to do, and they just start talking about everybody else. And so it's easy to just spend time on Facebook, like, well, I got nothing better to do, just go waste my whole day just talking about other people, whatever. Here's the great paradox of all time. What do the employees at Facebook do at work to waste time? I just think it's funny. And so we think this is such a modern problem that, like, oh, you don't have time, so you just start gossiping about other people. But now this goes all the way back. There's nothing new. And there's no statute of limitations on this. Like, you don't get to start gossiping once you hit a certain age. Like, well, we're just old men. Like, no, it's still not, all right? Paul expects the older women to have the wisdom to not even get involved in this in the first place. See, we're called to a mission, spreading the gospel, making disciples, and gossip cuts that off. It gets in the way. So not only does it keep us from accomplishing the mission, it actively works against it, because remember, it hurts people, hurts communities. And the last thing here is that gossip prevents conflict resolution. It hurts because it keeps you from resolving conflicts. If you have a problem with someone, you're supposed to talk to them about it. This is what Jesus says in Matthew 18. He says, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you gain your brother. But if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly, I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Again, I say to you, if 2 of you agree about anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am among them. This is a little just nugget here that's not necessarily part of the main thing. Yet that verse isn't about the prayer meeting that no one came to. It's about church discipline. When 2 or 3 people get together and approach someone, Jesus is like, well, that's the same thing as me being present in that meeting as well. See, if someone offends you, Jesus said, you go to them. It is astounding to me how many adults who claim to be Christians will refuse to do this. It's remarkable. That resolving a conflict means talking to the person you have the conflict with, not everybody else. Gossip hurts because it keeps you from resolving that conflict. Because you talk to someone else about it and you feel like you've done something. And so your brain sort of checks the box. There was a study that was done a little while ago that talked about how around New Year's resolution time, people are often posting, man, this is what I'm going to do this year. I'm going to go through this. This is my resolution. And then what happens is your brain sort of gives you a little endorphin rush as if you have accomplished that thing. So what they found was the people that posted about it and shared about it were actually less likely to follow through and keep those resolutions. And so this works the same way here. So you talk to someone else and you get that little ding like, we've done something. But in reality, you haven't actually accomplished anything. And so at the end of the day, look, we need to talk to people, not about people. To people, not about people. Gossip gives us this feeling that we've done something, but really we haven't. And so we've got to also here wrap this up. We've got to resist the urge to share things that aren't ours to share.
What I find is interesting, and I look at the people with shock on my faces. I only just was sharing with so-and-so online. I didn't want them to tell anybody else, or I didn't think it would get, you know, people don't understand that no matter what you put out there, it's public. I mean, if you even want to try and do it privately, it gets, I mean, people not get that about technology, it's there.
Yeah.
It just seems like that one's one that can be real easy to just get off on a table.
Almost definitely. Any other questions, thoughts? No? How we doing? One left? 3 down, 1 to go? We're ready? Power through? Yeah.
No, I just think that you touched on a point here that adults can be very helpful to one another. We're probably most of us are better equipped to deal with that than our youth today. So, you know, youth are using Twitter, Facebook. I mean, how many suicides have been caused because of gossip?
Yeah.
Because it's out there, it's instantaneous, and it's broad, and young people don't have the ability to deal with these emotions. They maybe don't have a network of friends, or maybe not in a church, and it can be so destructive to families. I think it's a huge challenge in the media. I mean, we were talking earlier, I mean, Facebook, the number of people we have pulled away from Facebook just because of the comments we're seeing, and it's that kind of instant gratification. Is it juicy gossip, or and it's you can impact somebody's life dramatically in the blink of an eye because of saying the wrong thing on social media. So it's something that worries me. My son's here; he's 13. Concerned me for him and how he's going to deal with it. How can I, as a father, coach him, lead him, guide him, and people want to surround ourselves with. It's a big threat to society, and I don't take it lightly.
Just to piggyback on that, my son, he's 12, and we've dealt with a lot of bullying issues. Technology has completely changed the atmosphere of bullying. You can't get away from it by going home. Doesn't matter if your dad is 6'7", 300 pounds. When you're at home on your computer, your dad can't help you defend against that stuff. When you're on your tablet, he can't help defend against that stuff. I think people don't realize a 5-second comment. When you don't see the other person, we disengage. That's not a person on the other end. We're just typing. We're just having a conversation. We don't see the damage that it does because of it.
Yeah, so there's a comedian actually, I saw him like Conan years ago that talked about that, how it's like you have this thing where it's like it used to be you say something negative to someone and then you see them be hurt by that and you kind of go like, oh, that doesn't feel good, like, and you don't, whereas online it's like, well, you can just say whatever you want and you don't see the reaction, you don't get that feedback, and you can just keep piling on, you're like, oh, this is great. And so, you know, you give someone that lack of consequences, even so far as having feeling and emotion about it, and it allows anybody to just kind of let loose like that. Yeah, it's wild. I mean, we used to always say, like, you know, I was a kid at least, and probably when all you were kids too, that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. But in reality, that's not true at all. Like, sometimes the wounds from sticks and stones heal a whole lot faster than the wounds from words. And it's actually a great way to transition into this next one. This other contribution trap, called Flame Wars. Here, this one's near and dear to my heart. The way we act online speaks to our witness and to our priorities. And so I want to take a look at something that Paul has to say here for the church in Colossae. He says, walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer each person. And so let's just break this down here. He says, walk in wisdom toward outsiders. Now, what's the difference between knowledge and wisdom?
Knowledge is knowing a lot of stuff, and wisdom is knowing when to use it.
Yeah.
And how to use it too.
Yeah, exactly. Wisdom turns knowledge into action, right? Knowledge, knowing how your hunting rifle works. Wisdom, not looking down the barrel when it's loaded.
Right.
And so what wisdom does is wisdom takes knowledge and then extrapolates. It's able to add on to it. Wisdom is knowing what to do when the situation isn't in the rule book, so to speak. And so how do we become, Paul says, I became all things to all people. Well, how do we do that without compromising our faith? Wisdom. And there's a gentleness to wisdom, right? It knows how much is needed for each situation. Wisdom anticipates. It thinks 2 or 3 steps ahead. So when Paul tells us walk in wisdom, he's calling us to a deliberate, thoughtful mode of activity towards outsiders. And so that's the other prayer, is walking in wisdom, and that walking in wisdom is geared towards outsiders. He wants us to be wise about the way we interact, the way we conduct ourselves with people outside the church. So we got to think about what we say around them. We got to think about what we do around them. And we got to do it in a way that shows wisdom. Now look, I firmly believe we should not be afraid of offending people with the gospel. But sometimes, like we make that the goal, right? Like we haven't been successful unless we tick somebody off. And so the mission isn't to offend people. That's not the goal. Sometimes that's the unfortunate byproduct. But that's not what we're after. And some people, they don't even get a chance to be offended by the gospel because we've already turned them away long before we even get to that point. We've put something else in their way that doesn't even give us the opportunity to share Jesus with them. And so they can't reject Jesus if they reject us before we even get a chance to share him. And so I'm not talking about changing the message here. I'm talking about changing the messenger, right?
Yes.
And so look, your life might be the only Bible that some people ever read, right? It's kind of a cliche, but it's true. And so is your translation faithful? Is it pointing people to Jesus? And Paul says we got to make the best use of the time. He uses this term here in the Greek that it means buying up or buying out. Like if you go to the grocery store and buy all of the salsa. Not that I've ever done that, of course, right? And so it's like opportunities are this finite resource and you're just trying to grab all of them. Think like hungry hippos, right? Just like trying to grab all of the marbles. That's sort of the idea here, is that these interactions that we have with people, these are opportunities. And the way that we use them, we're spending them in one way or another. And so what we've got to ask ourselves is, are we spending these opportunities wisely? Here's where wisdom comes in again. Are we being wise, or are we wasting time? Now, building relationships is not wasting time. When you're getting to know somebody, like that's a great way to share your faith, is you build a relationship and you let that come out of that relationship. It seems maybe inefficient in the short term, but it's so much more effective in the long term. But what wastes time is pettiness, it's bickering, it's arguing, it's all those sorts of, we were talking about the bullying thing, all of that toxic stuff that we post online. This is a great cartoon from XKCD. So you coming to bed? I can't. This is important. What? Someone is wrong on the internet.
Oh my.
And so it's like I see that. Man, yesterday I was funny because I'm preparing this talk, and I hear a little ding from Facebook, so I go check it out. I'm scrolling through, and I just keep seeing thing after thing that I just was like, oh my goodness. My talk tomorrow was just gonna be, I'm gonna burn my laptop and go, any questions? Like it was just like so frustrating. I get it, but we can't waste time getting engaged in this kind of stuff with other people. So making the best use of the time. Paul says, let your speech always be gracious. Let your speech sometimes be gracious. Let your speech be gracious when the person respects you. Let your speech be gracious when your rights are protected. Let your speech be gracious when they're nice to you. Is that what he says? He says, let your speech always be gracious. Now, the Greek word here for always is really interesting. It means always.
Oh.
Like all the time. Let your speech be gracious. Now, gracious is double-pronged here, because the word grace to us, we kind of have a double meaning, right? We think grace, like God's grace, You're given something that you don't deserve. That's grace. But then gracious also kind of means courteous, right? You're being gracious, you're polite. And what's interesting, the way that Paul uses this here actually infers both of those meanings here. That it's living in light of the grace that we've been shown in Christ, and then extending that to other people in a gracious, courteous, polite sort of way. See, when you're rooted in the grace of God, we talk about taking root, when you're rooted in the grace of God, it causes you to behave differently. When you've fallen in love with grace, that changes the way you see the world. When you know in your heart of hearts that God has chosen you, He's blessed you, and that Christ and all the rewards in Him are yours, you've got less to worry about. So even when you're attacked, you don't have to lash back. You don't have to do it because there's nothing to be fearful of. It's this idea of gentleness and respect. Look, boldness does not equal aggressiveness. You can be bold for Christ and not be rude. You can be bold and be gentle. And he says, let your speech be seasoned with salt. Now, salty speech in our vernacular means something very different than this, right?
It can.
Right? That's not what Paul's talking about. Let's talk food here for a second. I love food. Like 95% of my illustrations on Sunday morning are food. The other 5 are UFC. Like, that's just basically what you get from me as a preacher. You guys know what the most common mistake that home cooks make is?
Too much salt?
Not enough salt.
Oh, not enough.
Not enough salt. Because we've been told forever salt's bad, don't you salt? No, not enough salt is the #1 mistake that most home cooks make. Why restaurant food tastes so much better. Because here's the thing, is that when there's no salt, there's no flavor. Because what salt does, I'm not talking about over salting so you just taste saltiness. That's not what you want to do either. But if you use the right amount of salt, it actually brings out the natural flavors of the food that you're eating. So your steak tastes more like steak because of the way that you've salted it. And so this is what Paul's talking about here, is that speech seasoned with salt, it's not dry and dull. It's full of life, it's energetic, it's appealing,